This is Groundeffected, my name is your dad, and today I'm going to be doing something just a little bit different. Now usually I 3D print the models that I'm going to paint in the videos that I make. I don't usually do commissions and stuff anymore, mainly because I'm just so busy with the YouTube, but I do have a long-term client who asked me to do a box art for them. Basically what this means is that I'm going to be painting the model that the factory will then be using as the reference for the rest of the models that they make that are going to be part of their production run. Now I would definitely be lying if I said that I was not nervous about this at all. Now this model did not arrive in black. It came in a grey color which looked something like this. It was greyed out. I don't know what it was on it, and because I don't know what it was on it, I didn't know how my paints would stick to it, and so I painted it with Chaos Black, which is available in my store just over there. Now I'm not gonna lie, I've been a little bit bad about advertising my store. I'm not the kind of person who really does advertising or anything really. I'm actually really bad at advertising myself and the things that I do. I do have a store, however. You can order stuff online and most of the stuff is on the web store. It's just that we're not very good at being a store. That's because I'm so busy with the YouTube. However, if you're happy to deal with my uselessness at being a store, then have a look at the website. It is always linked in all the descriptions of my videos. I do say that, however, but I don't have a lot of stuff. I have very limited amounts of stuff. This is because stuff costs a lot of money. So buy more of my stuff so that I can buy more stuff to sell more stuff. Let's get back into the video. I'm not really sure if I've ever made this obvious, but I am based in England, so this does mean if you order online from across the pond in the US of the A, it will cost you more to have stuff shipped. Don't try ordering any of the Warhammer stuff because it's just useless. There's no point in doing it. It'll cost you more. Just order it from your local shop. Support your local hobby stores. But if you want to support me, then of course there is a link in the description. So the fact that it can break up into a load of different parts is obviously going to make it easier for me to color code things and paint things without having to mask off too much. I want to show you something else that I made quickly. I 3D printed this little thing with a bunch of little holes in it, and it's literally just a disc that has the exact holes for these crocodile clips that I use. Now, I have gotten questions in the past about using these crocodile clips and what are they. I just found them on Amazon. They were really cheap. Basically, they just have this bit of wire at the bottom. It's not really ideal, but it does do the job, and obviously it holds the parts pretty well. And the 3D printed thing that I made is just about good enough for me to slide things in and hold all the little bits. So I think my first step is going to be to deal with all this wood. Once I've done the wood and the trunk and everything, then at least I know that I've got the basis of everything done. I also feel like I probably want to start on some of these buildings at some point as well. So I may start on the buildings, I may start on the wood. I don't know. In the next 15 minutes, I will figure it out. Don't worry, that 15 minutes will only be about 3 seconds for you. And as I still hadn't quite completely made up my mind, I decided that the best thing to do would be to start zenithal highlighting a couple of things that are definitely going to need some highlighting underneath the colors that are going on top. I started out with the little house that goes at the base of the tree, as well as I tried to paint the top portion of the trees, which definitely did not fit in frame nor in my airbrush booth, but we'll figure this out later on. For now, as this is a quick step, I'm just going to do this in the weird awkward space and just deal with it later. I'm going to then take some skeleton horde, which is a contrast paint, and I'm going to spray that over the bottom house. This is going to be the main color of that house, and I'm going to give that some highlight with a little bit of deck tan. Yes, we're starting fresh in the video with deck tan. Now for something a little bit different, and I have no idea why I thought that this was a good idea. But I decided that instead of using washes, I was going to make a wash, and I was going to do that out of oil paints. This is a really great way of doing this, however. I really like the results of this, but the only thing that's a negative about this personally for me in this circumstance was the time it takes for that to dry. I usually want to paint that on and use the hairdryer to get it nice and dry and then dry brush over the top or add new layers, but with the oil it doesn't work like that. You need at least an hour or two for this thing to dry, and that's if you're lucky. That's if you make it thin enough. If you don't make it thin enough, you're talking all day, and sometimes all week if you really don't make it thin enough. But I'm digressing from the most important parts of this video, and that is how I'm painting the parts of this house. As you can tell, I took a lovely brown paint and I painted that over all the brown beams across the house. Also, you may have noticed that I painted a grey over the roof and gave that a slight highlight. I'm now going to come back in with a dark wash just to make sure that that gets into all the crevasses on the roof, like all the little holes are going to get filled with the dark paint. I'm going to use that same dark wash to go around the beams, but I'm going to focus on the edges of those beams in order to make the sides of the beams be darker right where it touches the house. I also sprayed ROXY Flesh Shade, which I like to do at the end of painting something, just to unify things as well as create a nice soft blended shadow over the shadows rather than these awkward brushes strokes all over the place. And now for the trunk of the tree, this is really simple because it's a very textured piece. Annoyingly, the textures aren't exactly perfect, but it's okay. I can still use those textures to help make it look like there's a lot more details on the piece. And to do that, I'm going to start out with a black base and I'm going to dry brush incrementally brighter browns. In this case, I used the same brown that I used for the beams on the building and below, but this is going to be covered up quite a lot by the yellower brown that I used over the top of that. I also added a little bit of deck tan into the brightest of these colors, just on some of the highest points, but I'm also going to come back again to this later because dry brushing leaves a lot of dry marks on the model and it tends to make things look a little bit chalky. And the best way that I find to deal with that once you've made all the chalkiness all over the model is to come back with a wash, and you spray this over most of the areas. I like to spray this into areas that are going to be dark. It also is going to give a tint to everything, but at the same time you can choose how much of it you want to layer on. I layer quite a bit of this and then I'll layer it even more into the shadows, and this is going to help create the depth that I want out of this piece. But at the same time, it is going to go over and filter some of that chalkiness that comes out from dry brushing objects. The next step is going to be adding some greens into the tree trunk itself and also on the mossy areas around the bottom of the tree trunk. I'm going to add this green as a spray because I really feel like a tree is not going to have just a little bit of green here and a little bit of green there, especially the size of this tree. If you had to step back and look at it, you would see portions of green, and this is gonna at least trick your eye into thinking that there is some moss growing on the base of the tree and that the tree has a little bit of life. I think maybe the green in painting a tree is kind of like the pinks in painting skin tones. It helps to maybe trick your eye that this thing has life. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. And speaking of not being a scientist, I need to paint the base, and the base I'm going to start out much in the same way that I painted the trees, but I'm going to just use slightly different browns. I'm also going to try and focus these browns around the areas mostly where the path is, but I do need to make sure that where the grass and stuff is has a little bit of brown underneath it, because you don't want to have black underneath your green grass because it won't look as natural, and that is just a thing. I'm also at this point gonna take some washes and create some depth. Using ROXY Flesh Shade, I can bring in a lot more warmth to the gravel and ground on the floor. Then for the grass, I'm gonna literally just spray this. I'm not really paying too much attention to overspray or anything like that because the scale of this is so small. In reality, these little blades of grass are literally so tiny, it wouldn't make any difference if there was a bit of overspray because maybe it is just another little patch of grass. And now on that grass though, it does need to be brightened up. The theme for this entire piece though is going to be an autumn theme, so I'm going to need to come back to this later, but for now I need to create the nice greeny areas, and I'm going to brighten that up with a little bit of dry brushing on the tips of it, and with some of that dirty down moss I'm going to come back in and spray all in the sort of darker areas. Dirty down moss takes a little bit of a while to dry, so while that dries, I'm gonna mask off some areas on this tree because I need to paint the roof of a little section that is kind of wedged in the side of the tree, that is part of the roof of the building that is going to be attached to the tree, that was separate from the tree, but this part isn't separate. It's a complicated situation, but I need to mask it off. I just use blue tack for this. You can use silly putty, masking tape, whatever it is, but blue tack was right next to me. It was easy to use, and I just needed to mask off for a very quick spray. I'm going to take the same approach that I took on the Ninja Turtles brick, but this time it's technically, I guess, terracotta. I would assume this is terracotta. I don't know. I'm not a builder. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a lot of things. I don't know if you noticed that. But what I do know is that I needed to make this color of the roof to be some form of a red. So I started out with a browny, kind of reddy brown color. That's kind of very orangey. And then I used a darker red wash to try and bring back some of the redness into this color. And originally I thought this was going to be bright enough, but it really wasn't. So I wanted to get a little bit more red into it, but before I do that, I'm going to get a little bit more value out of the color first, and I'm going to dry brush some of the higher tiles to just get some value in it. To get the redness back into it though, I'm going to take red ink and I'm literally going to spray that over everything. This is going to tint it and make it a lovely rich red color of terracotta-y bricks, I think. Next up is to take some deck tan, of course, our favorite color, and paint all the rest of the building with the deck tan. This is setting up the colors that are going to be essentially the main color of the building, but the deck tan isn't actually that color. That is just one of the setups for those colors. Whilst that dries, I'm going to quickly spray on a little bit of green onto the foliage on the top of the tree, and this is again going to need to have some sort of autumnal feel. So instead of going fully green, I'm going to use a really muted green and a nice bright yellow in some areas on the top of the foliage. Now remember, I said this doesn't fit inside my airbrush booth, so in order for me to paint this, I needed to paint dust all over my studio, and you can thank me for that later, but what I did do was just wrapped up with some cling film a little table and moved outside of my airbrush booth and sacrificed a little bit of dust all over the place. At this time, that thing needed to dry, and so I moved away from that while it was drying and came back to painting this house again. Once I had got all the deck tan in place, I then used the same technique as I used on the bottom house to paint all the shadows on the building, and then came back, but this time using Cygor Brown to paint all the wooden beams and the little edges of the roof and things like that. I also painted red on the little shutters of the windows because that is part of the references. There is red on the shutters, at least that's what I think it is, and so I painted it these colors. I also kind of painted a little bit of yellow into the window to make kind of a light, but then I realized that if this is going to be produced, there probably isn't going to be a way that they're going to paint OSL, so I didn't go overboard and I dulled that down a little bit so as not to cause any technical issues later on down the line. Now, I have not used my Tamiya weathering kit in a very long time, but I felt like it was time in this glorious event to bring it out one more time and go in and weather a little bit where the characters would possibly walk a lot up and down the steps around this building, and this just to create a little bit more character. Even though it's really small and not too noticeable, it's something that you can see if you look up close. For the base, the commissioner of this piece and I had discussed absolutely nothing. He did not know what to do, and neither did I, but I did suggest to him, perhaps we use a copper color and paint all the knots that go around the base, and then maybe give them a bit of a shade. But more importantly, before we get to that, I need to paint that copper. One thing about metallic paints is it's normally not a one coat and done, so trust me, I spent a lot of time putting the one coat that was actually 3 coats to make all of that copper painted around the base. But to get a really awesome shade on it, I took a really dark shade and I sprayed that, which I think was pretty much Agrax Earthshade, right at the bottom, and I'm just shaded just the bottom portion of it, then took Reichland Flesh Shade and shaded just the middle portion of it, and this created that nice gradient that you see. Now, the miniatures that go on this piece were not sculpted to the highest of quality, so annoyingly, this also meant that my camera just refused to focus 99% of the time with this, so I really don't have any footage of these guys that is any usable at all. So I'm going to show you about 20 seconds of me painting them. It's going to make absolutely no sense, but once I'm done speaking the words out of my mouth, that is when I was finished painting these little miniatures, and I put them in their place and called the model done. And as we round out yet another Groundeffected video, I want to say thank you so much to everybody who watches, everyone who shares, likes, comments, all the rest of the things that apparently help to boost videos on this platform. Also, I want to thank the guy who put his trust in me in painting this tree of destiny. And at this point as well, I want to say thank you to my patrons who, honestly, without them, I would not be able to keep the videos going. So really, a special thank you to those patrons. And if you didn't like anything that you saw in this video, I think you may or may not know that I don't care. And now you can fuck off.